be sounding very boring probably because it's more about markets and not about succession planning and stuff. But coming back to a little bit of what I get paid for, right? And I know it's pre-lunch again. Probably people are focusing on lunch, but let me try and make it more interactive and hope you guys can also interact in between, right? So I think 361. The first thing that I want to put it out is what are we, right? You might not see us too flashy on the mutual fund side and stuff, but I think what you need to understand is obviously the way Anup is building this business is primarily front and center at the client, right? He and the whole investment committee is obsessed about creating long-term alpha on a generational basis. We are not looking to do it for the short term, right? If you see our listed equity piece, right, half of that, or let's say 40-45% of that listed equity AUM actually is coming from overseas institutions, right? And they have 4 marquee global overseas institutions, including a sovereign wealth fund from the Middle East. But the interesting bit is, हम अपना सारा पैसा similarly manage करते हैं. Across our strategies, it is anywhere between a 75 to 80% overlap for the strategies which are similar in nature. So what I'm trying to tell you is कि our focus on fiduciary responsibility of every money is the same, right? That is very important for you to kind of keep in prospect. This is obviously the team. We can get into more details. I'll come to the track later. That is the least important part, if actually from our sense of the word. I think presentation का headline में SCDV लिखा था. What is actually investing, right? मतलब ये ऐसा profession है, मतलब मैं ex avatar, I was on the sell side researching autos. I used to head the autos practice for a long period of time. तो इंटरेस्टिंग है कि जिस रोल में मैं पहले था, ऑटोज ऐसे सेक्टर है जिसमें सबको लगता है, उनको पता है कि कौन सा अच्छा गाड़ी है, राइट है, कौन सा अच्छा स्टॉक है, क्योंकि सब अपनी गाड़ी चलाते हैं. किसी ने मारुति खरीदा है, किसी ने टाटा खरीदा है, किसी ने मर्सिडीज खरीदा है, राइट. मोस्ट ऑफ द क्लाइंट्स दैट आई वुड मीट think that they know about auto investing. Similarly, in markets, most people think that they know markets really well, right? And they could do a much better job than you on the other side, right? But I think the important factor here is that I'll come to the SCDV framework, but what is very important in investing is like इसमें तो इतनी किताबें लिखी गई हैं कि कोई लिमिट ही नहीं है, आप कितना पढ़ लेंगे. The question is not about पढ़ना, the question is to remember what you read. To be honest, the retention ratio is very important. So the most important thing that we have retained is remember the rule number 1, which the Oracle Mawama has said, is don't lose too much, right? Because as Anunaya said, 2008-9 में जब market गिर रहा था, अगर आपका portfolio would have been down 60-70%, potentially even recovery के लिए to go back to where you were, you would have to get to 120% returns, right? So in deep drawdowns, if you don't lose much, logically speaking, in the long term, you should be okay, right? Now the difference is कि आपका alpha कितना होगा, whether it's a 3% alpha, 5% alpha, or no alpha, right? Now, what obviously this is Anup and Anup's brainchild along with the investment team. What we did was, I would say, no rocket science, but what we looked at the market data for more than 20-25 years. We saw that the index generally does anywhere between 12 to 15% of earnings growth, depending on the cycle, and the average index has an ROE of close to 14-15%, right? So what we said, let's take the threshold of 15% both on the profit growth side as well as on the return on equity. अब return on equity क्या होता है कि आपने जितना पैसा डाला उसके सामने आपका अगले साल का कितना profit है. So profit by the equity that you put in the business, right? So what it tells you is कि ये धंधे definitely generate much better profits, return on equity over a consistent period. The assets can provide better asset efficiency. धंधा अच्छा है, मतलब broadly speaking. The growth part is कि इस धंधे का runway कितना है. कुछ businesses 40% ROE पे हो सकते हैं, but runway grow करने का कम है. For example, जहाँ पे penetrated sectors होंगे, for example, right? So what we did is कि you try and break the market down in these buckets. So the right side of the SCDV quadrants that you see, S and D, those are companies जो लॉन्ग टर्म में बिजनेसेस ऐसे हैं कि उनके एसेट्स में ज़्यादा आरओई जनरेट होता है, राइट? अभी किसी का 40% आरओई होगा, किसी का 20% आरओई होगा, बट द राइट साइड ऑफ द क्वाड्रेंट जनरेट्स डेफिनेटली जनरेट्स बेटर आरओई. सो इनहेरेंटली ये slightly superior धंधे हैं if you're taking a long term view, right? The quadrant at the top, which is the secular quadrant, which is what is basically is कि they also have consistent profit growth. Now the thresholds are, हम लोग ऐसे evaluate करते हैं last 10 years का data, we don't look at forward, last 10 years का data में से 6 out of 10 years which companies have crossed these thresholds, right? So today for example 21% of the index, which is BSE 200, is in the S bucket, right? So basically 80% are not the top quartile performances in terms of both these parameters. Some you're seeing some sector names, right? These sector names are only representative. What I'm basically trying to say is कि for example autos या consumer discretionary businesses में historically उन companies ने like probably 5 out of 7, 6 out of 10 would have delivered these kind of behaviors, right? Not necessarily that all are doing today, but that is a function of business cycle, right? So the seculars is, I would say, the part of the market which inherently would be well known, right? क्योंकि consistent हैं, everybody will know. Now the beauty is that when you think about investing strategies, you will find, and I'll come to the C and V, you will find a lot of growth managers heavily indexed towards the right of this portion, which is the S and D bucket, right? There is where the secular long-term structure remains in place. Now the thing with seculars is, if you're buying a secular stock, inherently ये स्टॉक धीरे धीरे करके महंगे हो जाते हैं, क्योंकि जब आपने लिया था, मान लीजिए आप बहुत स्मार्ट थे, आपने 2010 में कोई सेक्युलर स्टॉक खरीदा और वो 2020 तक सेक्युलर रहा, तो अगर आपने 15p पे लिया, डेफिनेटली 2020 में वो 50p हो गया होगा, हाइपोथेटिकली स्पीकिंग, राइट? तो आज 50p पे सेक्युलर स्टॉक, whether it will remain secular is the big question to ask 2030 में. Like I'll, इस प्रेजेंटेशन में डेटा नहीं है, बट आई विल जस्ट थ्रो अ क्विज क्वेश्चन. 2000, एंड आई थिंक कनक हैज हर्ड दिस क्विज क्वेश्चन व्हेन दे वर इन बॉम्बे, लाइक 2010 में अगर 100 स्टॉक्स सेक्युलर थे हमारे फ्रेमवर्क से, मतलब 2010 में जो 100 सेक्युलर स्टॉक्स थे हाइपोथेटिकली स्पीकिंग, मतलब 2000 से 2010 में उनका प्रीवियस ट्रैक रिकॉर्ड बहुत अच्छा था. हाउ मेनी ऑफ दोज 200 स्टॉक्स इन 2010 रिमेन्ड सेक्युलर इन 2020? एनी गेसेस ऑन, मतलब 100 में से कितने स्टॉक रहे होंगे 2020 तक भी सेक्युलर? 40. Okay, one good number is 40. Any other show of hands or guesses? This is just random quiz यार, इसमें आप बोल सकते हैं. 25%. Sorry, I heard another number somewhere. 10. Okay. So interestingly, like most of the times when we ask this question, people talk about 30-40% because ये companies तो अच्छी हैं, तो कितनी कंपनियां खराब करेंगी? The end result is 11%. So the answer that gives, so whoever answered 10%, that's probably one of the closest that I've ever got the response. So what it basically tells you is कि the job of a portfolio manager is not to only buy S and hold it forever, right? The portfolio manager's job is to keep evaluating businesses that are likely to deteriorate, which is very important. Because when, if you say, for example, what stops us from making a 100% secular basket portfolio? Like 100% सारा S में डाल दो, right? The risk that you run is the same risk, right? If in the next 5 to 7 years, X percentage of your portfolio starts to deteriorate, and that portfolio inherently would be a much more expensive portfolio because they are well discovered, right? You run the risk of significant derating on valuations. So even if your businesses show consistent earnings compounding, when I mean consistent means decent है, but पुराने history के standards के सामने से कम है, right? So there is where your derating risk starts. So the right side of this bucket has a derating risk inherently there because they are businesses that have strong ROEs. But depending on business cycle, you need to be. So from our philosophy, what we do is, हम लोग हर समय S पे तो overweight रहेंगे, right? So 21% of the market is S. We will always be overweight S. Now the overweights can depend, it might be 10%, 12%, 9%, 15%, all depends on what we see in our S portfolio. But that's a core, right? The other side, the left side of this quadrant is very interesting, right? This is, if I can use the, again, this is very wrong of me to use it. This is the broadly the value bucket, right? What happens in value is, again, value is in the eye of the beholder. You can find value at 50p also, you can find value at 10p also. But I think the traditional way which people think of value is this bucket, where what people are trying to identify, those managers are trying to identify is कि पहले filter है कि you don't pay too much to buy the company, and then hope that these companies show turnaround, right? So cyclical business, for example, जो C's हैं, right? The C's are typically companies, as you can see, the representative sectors are local, domestic sectors, right? Capital goods, cement, infrastructure, logistics. तो इन sectors को you need a lot of strong policy push domestically, whether it's investment side capex, you need to see more investment side grow up for this sector to do well, this bucket, right? अब आप पिछला 10 साल का track record देख लीजिए. The whole economy had a very lopsided growth on the consumption basket, right? Infrastructure investments, front loading, forward manufacturing investments were, say, other than autos, बहुत sectors में नहीं हुआ. Few sectors came up later, like chemicals, all of those sectors came up much later. But inherently, we haven't built manufacturing capability, we've underinvested. Now, what is happening today, right? You are clearly seeing policy push happen. सरकार ने PLI लाया है, government globally लोग China से थोड़े averse हो रहे हैं. Again, they will probably take some time to make this supply chain shift. So this cyclical basket is seeing a lot of good incremental investments, and there is more opportunity. So this cyclical basket has seen good outperformance. So when we are right now, what we are thinking is कि जो C है, that is actually a better position than D, because yes, they have not generated ROEs in the past, because जो उन्होंने invest किया था, they were not able to asset utilize those. But now, as the demand, both domestic and exports, is going up, yes, cyclical basket should start to outperform. And I'll show you the SCDV performance to kind of make my point. This basket is obviously much better in terms of their historical behavior. Profit growth होता है, लेकिन ROE growth कम था. Now जो V bucket है, ये सबसे ज़्यादा interesting bucket है. Now interesting in a different way. Their historical track record for longer periods have been the fact कि neither profit growth होता है, neither ROE growth होता है. ROE भी 15% के threshold से नीचे रहता है, और 15% PAT growth. So you don't see both of them, right? If you actually go through the sectors, it's somewhat very very intuitive to understand. Telecom, PSU banks, utilities, right? Telecom as a sector इस देश में last 10-12 साल was a massive problem, right? You had so much competitive density. We are the lowest in the world in terms of the pricing on a per GB data basis, and we are one of the largest consumers of telecom data. Like, it's unbelievable. If you actually pull both sides, I think we should make a round of applause to the telecom companies in this country, that they have, इसको बोलते हैं nation building exercise में they have been so much critical, because when we talk about digitization, if you don't have the infrastructure at the back end, you cannot have anything on the front end. Like Ananya talked about how digital is going to be important. Like, how are we talking all this? Because this is now literally free. Like 5 years back, we used to think about cost of GB of data. Today, I don't know even if anybody thinks about their data pricing. Like, it's gone. So, but what is happening? What has changed? Because it went to that level कि आज ऐसा हो गया, industry consolidate हो गया, government understands that they are an infrastructure play. Now they are seeing significant improvements in cash flows. Now they are seeing incremental capex requirement going down. Government has also reduced pricing for whatever spectrum they are selling to them. They are relaxed their terms of payment. So ये V bucket ऐसा है कि यहाँ पे you need to understand where are big changes happening, right? You cannot buy everything in the V bucket, right? But you will have to identify where the changes are happening and where the upgrade potential comes through, right? Today, for example, Bharti, which is a large activate in our portfolio, we believe it is actually a dividend yield company today, which you might not believe. It started to pay the first dividend last quarter, right? In our understanding, this will be an 8-10% dividend yield company, right? 2 years out, we're not talking about Bharti as a V, you're probably talking about Bharti as a D, right? Defensive. Similarly, there are other unique cases. So the way we will build the portfolio is we will not be zero in value traps, right? We will be underweight the value traps, but our value traps will be companies that we are trying to find upgrades, right? And I'm again qualifier here, turnaround identify karna by knowing by talking to the management, like we talked about succession planning. The big challenge for executives, new executives coming on, is very difficult, right? We'll tell you, obviously the Phoenix portfolio has done phenomenally well. We have been touched with very lucky, I would put it that way. But I think obviously process helps, but getting the turnaround right, getting the V's right is not easy. बहुत लोगों ने enough times किया है, they have not succeeded a lot. So that's why when you build a balanced portfolio, what we do is we'll always remain overweight the S, always remain underweight the V. Currently we are overweight the cyclical basket. So for example 16 के सामने we will be roughly 27%, seculars के 21% के सामने will be roughly 30% odd. Defensives में we are underweight because still you are seeing a lot of expensive consumer staples. ये सब sectors अभी भी बहुत expensive है. Now you can ask me कि यार ये SCDV तुमको क्यों लगता है इसमें overweight होना चाहिए? What is the historical reason why you should build portfolio like this? Why do you think you can outperform over a consistent period? Now this is the response to that. This is historical data for all those buckets, right? तो अगर आप CAGR जो नीचे सबसे ब्लू लाइन में है उसको देखेंगे तो निफ्टी का CAGR है 10% over this period. It's obviously a very fairly long period data set, 16 years plus. If you remember the left side of the chart of SCDV, the C's and V's are significantly underperformed. That 10%. One is 7.1, one is 7.9. The other side, the seculars have significantly outperformed at 13%, while defensives, though still being lower than Nifty, is still higher than C's and V's, right? But when you actually see, let's say last 3 years, if you focus on from 20 onwards, the right side has outperformed the left side in a big way, right? Cumulative numbers for, say, for example, a value trap bucket is close to 70% plus, right? While the same for a secular is hardly 25-26%, right? So if your portfolio or your client's portfolio had invested in the large portion of their capital in companies that were on the S and D bucket on the right side of the quadrant, you would have been very lucky if you had even broken even to the benchmark, right? Sadly, most growth managers who were on the right side of the bucket were much lower. Their drawdowns were, like, obviously the number say for itself could be 20% below benchmark, right? So that's why when you have an approach where you're trying to identify and invest on upgrades of numbers, upgrades of ROE trajectory of a company, upgrade on terms of capital intensity of a business. Like for example, as I mentioned telecom, the capital intensity is going down. So you know ROE is going to go up. You know free cash flow is going to go up. So you have to be overweight that space. That's a V, right? So this is the reason that SCDV works. The thing that we'll tell you is this sharp outperformance of V's. If you go back in history, you will clearly see बड़े greens के बाद बड़ा red भी है, right? तो value traps का problem ये रहता है कि वो outperform तो कर जाते हैं, but they cannot sustain that outperformance. They give that back, right? So are you potentially at the peak cycle of the value trap rally? Potentially. Could happen. Obviously forward forecasting तो जो भी बोलेगा वो गलत ही होगा most likely. But clearly there is strong merit to have a balanced portfolio which is not just overweight the C's and V's, which have done really well over the last 2 years, right? So this is where I would kind of SCDV framework in questioning, right? If you guys have any questions, doubts before I progress on other stuff on markets, if you have any doubts, thoughts on SCDV, please would be happy to hear from you, clarify anything if you have any questions, thoughts. Okay, no problem. We can probably take it later. Right. So I think I would skip some of the macro points that's really not too useful in the current. I'll try and make it less slide dependent. But I think अभी एक इससे पहले एक मीटिंग में था तो there was this general most popular question about where do you think markets are headed, right? So we keep joking about it कि अगर आप ऑब्वियसली आप लोग तो बहुत लोगों को सुनते होंगे, पूछते भी होंगे सेम सवाल. आई थिंक आपको क्या करना चाहिए, आपको सबका पॉइंट नोट करके रखना चाहिए कि उन्होंने क्या बोला था. 9 out of 10 will have gone wrong in the next 6 months, right? So I think the only thing that is sure is that you will be wrong. So I think the challenge about forecasting is the fact that I think it is more important to have the direction right than the quantum right? That is very important. Direction is more important. So the fact is that here, like market cap to GDP is a very top-down macro, but what I'm trying to put here is that 12 months prior, the discussion was potentially about the next world war, right? And 12 months later, we are sitting at all-time highs. Nasdaq, which was sitting where people said that the 5% interest rate is going to smash Nasdaq to 50% below, today Nasdaq is sitting at 10% below its all-time high, right? So what clearly it tells you is that market knows more than you always before, and if you try to forecast him, you will likely be wrong, right? The only thing here is that from a relative global basis, this metric, when asset managers look at it globally, India doesn't seem too different, too problematic, and I'll tell you why. So from a global manager standpoint, what they did 6 months prior, and we were having these conversations because we have institutions managing capital, and they were saying, okay, see, China has underperformed so much. China is a 30% weight है. MSCI एक global index है जिसको ज़्यादातर लोग foreigners track करते हैं. उसमें 30% चाइना का weight है. Let's put more money in China. चाइना सस्ता है, रिकवरी हो रहा है, कोविड से बाहर आ रहा है. Market did well. October, November, September, October, November. But suddenly 2 months later, Chinese economy started to soften, and you obviously had a challenge, right? So अब क्या हो गया? Now managers are realizing that India में actually fundamentals तो बहुत strong है, right? So Indian fundamentals are strong. Should we actually miss the market? Now you are seeing inflows come through. Now you are seeing people participate. And that's where the whole momentum is building. Valuation wise, this is a very important metric to keep in mind. We have not gone to extreme levels of valuation. Probably on current prices, daily prices are 3.4 पे होंगे हम लोग, 3.4, 3.45. But broadly speaking, we are at a midpoint range. Earnings growth is 12-15%. We should be okay from a large cap basis, from a large to mid cap basis. That orientation should be okay. Small caps obviously have rallied a lot, so you kind of need to be a little more cautious there. But incrementally, I think if market keeps going higher and higher without earnings growth, that will probably be a problem point. I would quickly come, because I'm being highlighted about the time situation. What I'll kind of say, this is the flagship strategy, which is the multi-cap PMS. Clearly see, as I mentioned, secular is an overweight by nearly 9%. Cyclicals is an overweight, and defensives and value traps obviously are underweight. Again, but इसमें interesting है, अगर आप large mid का constituent देखेंगे, obviously this has a slightly higher large cap focus, because we are trying. This is the generational compounder. Okay, this is the way all our overseas investments are managed, right? But clearly the top 10 stocks has value traps, right? So when I mentioned that we are underweight value traps, but the value traps which we invest upon are high active weights. For example, you might not see a Tata Motors in anybody's portfolio in the country with a 4% active weight. Primarily speaking, that's the bottom-up work that we do, or let's look at CCL products, for example. The same thing. I would put the summary performance later, but this is the Phoenix portfolio, which is again SCDV, but it is more focusing on small and mid and trying to identify कि कहाँ पे upgrades ज़्यादा हो रहे हैं in the small cap and mid cap bucket. As you can see, the bottom right side, the market cap breakdown is much more towards small and mid. 54% is small and mid, and large cap is only 43. And obviously the performance is a function of the cycle, right? So the performance has been strongly helped because a lot of good quality mid and small cap companies were underloved last year when the whole market was collapsing, and that has seen strong recovery cycles, right? So that's been a very positive theme for the Phoenix portfolio, and obviously I would say performance पे बहुत ज़्यादा focus नहीं करना चाहिए, but I think again still people ask about it, so I'm just keeping it here. These are obviously some of these 3 flagship strategies that we have, and Phoenix has obviously blown through the roof in terms of how it's done well, but market goes through cycles, everything works in balances. I would say the mix of a well created low, let's say type low type 1 risk, more high type 2 focus portfolio is multi-cap PMS, and that's something that is a fair weather one, and you should have a portion of your portfolio in Phoenix to drive active alpha, because that's where your active alpha builds out. Both those strategies have very strong positioning. Obviously multi-cap is with the much larger track, and since inception has done really well. I would one point that I would, before people kind of later converse with me and ask कि अरे multi-cap PMS benchmark के ज़्यादा दूर नहीं है, why has it in the last 2-3 years not done that well? Again, I am going back to that S&D. This is a growth portfolio which was always overweight the seculars, while it has not seen, which has been able to manage the drawdown so well, right? So you have to look at through cycle, and as the recovery on the S&D picks up and the season we go down, I think this is likely to significantly outperform. So again, I think I am on time, so I'll stop here. Any questions, feedbacks, thoughts? Yeah, or we can have questions and discussions on lunch. Okay.
Give the mic. Questions, please. So be there for some time. I think with the questions, we also have a lot of learning which needs to be shared. Questions नहीं होते हैं मतलब हमको सब कुछ समझ में आ गया है. So let's write it on the wall what we have understood, what we have learned. Sir को mic दे देना पूरा mic. Friends, I was really impressed with this strategy of SCDV. मेरे को तो लगता है SCDV के ऊपर में पूरा एक दिन की वर्कशॉप होनी चाहिए, लाइक फंडामेंटल्स के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से. सब लोगों को लग रहा होगा क्या बोल रहा है, बट हाँ, इवन आई थिंक अजय इज एग्रीइंग टू दैट. मेरे को इतना इंटरेस्टिंग लगा ये पूरा का पूरा कंसेप्ट. So yes, that is what he's telling Anup. I was mentioning about Anup Maheshwari and the whole team. So this is a very very detailed stuff. But again, अभी सब लोगों के दिमाग में, जहन में, मैंने one thing is there, whether we should be into a growth strategy or a value. Last 2 years, value has gone up. All the value funds have gone up, and growth funds have actually been. So what is this? I think a strategy like this will make a lot of sense. Understanding this so that at least आपको किस फंड हाउस में कब रहना है और किस फंड हाउस से कब निकलना है, और मोर देन दैट डाइवर्सिफिकेशन कैसे करना है. हम लोग क्या करते हैं ना कि मतलब सभी, जैसे ना, नॉट टू नेम, जैसे हम लोग सभी वैल्यू में कर दिया. एक ICICI का वैल्यू फंड ले लिया, एक HDFC का भी वैल्यू फंड ले लिया, तो वो फायदा नहीं है. दैट्स नॉट डाइवर्सिफिकेशन. इवन इफ यू वांट टू बी इन वन AMC, बट एक वैल्यू, एक ग्रोथ, एक cyclical, इस तरीके से अगर हो, I think that makes more sense. So any questions on that? It's a good time and opportunity to ask and write it on the wall what we have learned. तो अभी क्या लग रहा है सर आगे, ग्रोथ या वैल्यू? वो कहते हैं ना लास्ट, वो जो गलत सवाल पूछ लेते हैं, नेक्स्ट व्हाट इज नेक्स्ट.
अगर मुझे पता हो तो मैं यहाँ नहीं होता.
So I think that's what every right answer is. ये मुझे पता होता तो मुझे नहीं होता. But like, how can we identify that growth will do better now? मैंने, if we compare it with interest rates or anything like, मैंने कुछ some pointers.
See, you are putting me in a very difficult spot, but I think, देखिए, at the end everything is bottom up. If you still want to take macro calls, I think it's fraught with risk. But the broad thought process should be that. Like there are a lot of consumer discretionary plays other than autos, कुछ खास चला नहीं है. So if you think there is a broad, after a big COVID growth here, now there has been 12-15 months of slowdown. If you think कि हाँ यहाँ से there is a pickup, whether it's a QSR segment, durables, if you think there is some recovery on that bottom up data points, whether data point can be आप किसी consumer dealer के durable के dealer से मिले as a client, आप QSR chain owner से मिले, if you think there is pickup, I think that's the growth metric coming back slowly. Interest rates, again, I will probably be 100% wrong. The fact is that interest rates seem to have peaked out. Inflation in most markets, even as stubborn as UK, is starting to ease. And other than the tomato prices problem in India, but I think we should be okay. So if the way I would think is not trying to make you too bullish, but if we are at market levels with much higher interest rates globally, if say next 12-15 months some of this ease off happens, generally interest rates and market multiples have inverse correlations. Very well understood topic. मैं कुछ नया तो बोल नहीं रहा हूँ. So then that should probably help some of these growth stocks, because that time growth becomes more of premium, not of valuations. So people are ready to pay more because आप ब्याज पे उतना नहीं कमा पाएंगे. So I would say that probably is the least worst way of answering your question.
Thank you so much. I think that's quite helpful for all of us. I'll request Anunya also to please come up. I'll request our volatility coaches to please come up and give a memento to our speakers. I'll request, Gopal da, Sujan da, Bhaduri da, Rajesh. Yeah, in the meantime.
So, just one thing, I'm sure many of you would be noticing a name 361 Asset.
Yeah.
Now, well, my bad, I should have done it before. This name might be looking a little unfamiliar to you all, and then when you would have seen Nishant presenting 64,000 crore that we are managing, then many of you would be thinking, ये कहाँ से हो गया, नई company और ये. So basically, it's a name change. We used to be called IIFL Wealth and Asset Management. We have got ourselves rechristened. The new name is 361 Asset. It's largely done to get our messaging far and more clearer. 360 may be a very innovative name that you might be thinking, but it's basically our ethos. Our ethos is that, we take a complete 360-degree view, and that one is none but you, and through you, your clients. So that's what 361 is all about. Take a complete 360-degree view about a client and ensure that their interest remains protected. Not a new company, a new name. The old name continue to be IIFL Wealth and Asset Management. All our communication that you would see will say 361 Asset within bracket, formerly IIFL Wealth and Asset Management. That's a little bit of clarification I thought I should give.
Big welcome. And with this name, I think the name is at the top now. Alphabetically, that's the advantage.
And now we seek your support to remain on the top on the other aspects as well.
So I'll request all four of you, and even Satya Prakash Mahavarji and Partho and who else? Ashish and Ashish, Piyush, Ajay Bhil, Saurav, Vivek, to please, if I am not missing anyone, any of our volatility coaches. Piyush? So, yeah, that's it. Some of us are present.